where you can play with the balance of the aperture, the shutter speed, and the ISO and see its effects. So aperture, and it shows you right on here. It's really cool. So I know the lower f-stop will blur out my background. It's not going to show you the initial, what it's going to look like here yet until you take the picture. So it's not really going to change the picture in front of you right now, but it will show you here. Watch. Aperture, it's showing me in this area. It's giving me a preview. A low f-stop, look at it, blurs out the background. A high f-stop sharpened up those. Remember, a high f number is going to make a really tiny opening. A low f number opens the lens wide up. So when I open the lens wide up, it's going to blur out the background. I know that. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the second one, shutter speed. When I have a wide opening, hopefully my shutter speed can move a little faster. So this is my light meter here, and I have to get it to the middle. So I'm going to go, look at it, it's a little bright now, showing on my light meter. It's going to be a little bright. So I'm going to increase my shutter speed to darken my image up. With your shutter speed, the faster it moves, the more it freezes motion, but it also lets less light in as well. So your image will actually get a little darker, and that's what your light meter does. It's actually speeding up your shutter speed to make your images darker. It's slowing down your shutter speed to let more light in to make your images brighter. So if I make my shutter speed faster, it darkens my photo, lightens my photo if I make it slower. It's all about this balance. So you just have to figure out how to balance these on your camera. So here, it looks like it's a good exposure, right? 2.8, and it's just a fake scene. So it might be totally different in different lighting. 2.8 wide f-stop gives you 1/1000th of a shutter speed. I would never know that. I'm using my light meter to find that out. I was watching the light meter as I move this to see what a good exposure would be. So now I could take a picture. See how the background's blurry? At 1/1000th of a second, the shutter speed is not even freezing that propeller that was moving. So we'd have to go faster to freeze that propeller. So I want to freeze the propeller. So these are the decisions you make as a photographer. So when I'm looking at this, I'm like, I'm not really happy with this because that propeller is not frozen. So to freeze the propeller, I would have to go faster with my shutter speed. And the camera only goes to 1/4000th of a second. But when I made my shutter speed faster, look what happened. It made my picture dark. Oops, that's too dark now. So darn it, now I have to adjust that. So that's in the negative now. I can't make my lens any wider. Like it's open as far as it'll go. So my only other option is I have to adjust my ISO. And look at what happens. It moves on the light meter. When I adjust the ISO higher, it brightens up my picture. So now, look at that. My propeller's frozen. Now the background's really, really blurry, and it turned out. Now, I just can't, because of the scenario, take a picture with a frozen propeller and a sharp background because it just won't. The lighting won't allow. So here, this is how I would sharpen up the background. It's saying it's way too dark. The only way to do this is to increase my ISO, but the ISO will not go far enough or high enough to allow me to get a good picture. Look at it, still too dark. So I have to bring down my f-stop, and you might just have to make a sacrifice with your picture. So for this, I have to sacrifice that. I did brighten it up, sharpen it up a little, just not a ton. Okay, one last thing to write in ISO. So you see, I used a very high ISO for this picture. I made the camera very sensitive to light. So you would use a very high ISO if you're trying to speed up your shutter speed. If you're trying to take pictures in low lighting, you could use a high ISO. But do you see on this picture the effects of the high ISO? It's very grainy and noisy. Do you see the speckles? So the downside to increasing your ISO is you're going to have some speckling and some noise. So it's kind of a sacrifice you have to make though if you want to take a picture. So if you want to take a picture in certain conditions, like I'd rather, if I'm in a church taking pictures of a wedding and I can't use my flash to add in light and it's low lighting, I would rather have little speckles on my picture from a high ISO than have all my pictures be blurry because my shutter speed was moving too slowly. So if you can see, this is the noise that happens. Think about, you guys, your cell phone cameras. Your cell phone cameras, if you notice, if you take a picture in the dark, it'll have the high ISO. It'll be all speckly and kind of grainy. That's what it does. But it's just like your decision as a photographer. What's more important, to get the shot or to have noise? I mean, sometimes you have to just make that decision. So ISO, shutter speed, and aperture all work together in order to give you the proper exposure. So they call it the exposure triangle because all of these three elements make a triangle, because there's three, and they kind of work together. They do work together reciprocally. When you change one, it changes another setting. They have to balance each other. So for you guys to help find the balance, it might be a good idea for you to go onto this website and play. Eventually, I am going to have you take this challenge, and you're going to have to show me your score with the challenge. So this is a great way to practice. Once you think you've kind of got it, it'll tell you get a good exposure. It'll give you commands. And so to get a good exposure means you could use any of these settings, but you have to balance them to get it to the middle. So I'm just watching the light meter right now. Oops, that would be a good exposure. It's in the middle. All I would have to do. And then it says, make the propeller look still. So to make the propeller look still, I know I need to increase my shutter speed, but then I also have to like balance this all out. So I have to, an increased shutter speed means it's opening and closing super fast. So not a lot of light's getting in my camera. So I'm going to open up my lens, and I'm going to, that didn't move my light meter at all. So I'm now going to have to increase my ISO. And I want to start low and go high because the higher ISOs are more speckly the higher you go. So I always like try to use as low of an ISO as I can. Oh, something's being weird. That I got it right though, but now it's kind of getting this blue screen. But anyway, this is just good practice. For now, I'm not gonna, have you take the challenge, but if you want to practice and take it, you can. And remember, there's that learning thing too that goes over aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. When you take a picture, guys, you have to decide, do I want to focus on aperture, like depth of field, or am I trying to capture or show movement? Then I might want to focus on shutter speed. So you have to kind of decide what you want to focus